Hello and welcome to Seed Speaks. My name is Sonia Begum and I'm the editorial director here at Seed World Group. And I'm very excited because today's episode is special. We're talking about carbon markets. From far-fetched, there's so many questions surrounding this exciting topic of carbon capture, sustainability, and really what carbon markets mean for not only farmers, but the industry at large. So I'm very excited because today I'm joined by three experts. I'm joined by Tiffany Dowell Lashmet, who is the Associate Professor and Extension Specialist at Agricultural Law at Texas A&M. Lars Dyrud is the CEO of EarthOptics, and Ben Gordon serves as Carbon and Ecosystem Services Global Portfolio Leader at Corteva Agriscience. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Sonia.
Yeah, thanks.
Right.
Thanks.
Well, you guys all three have very different expertise. And so what I'd like to do is have each of you kind of tell me a little bit, a high level view of what you do and as it relates to carbon markets. I know we all wear many hats. So I'll start with you, Tiffany. What do you do as it pertains to carbon markets?
Sure. Yeah. So in my role here as an agricultural law specialist with Texas A&M, you can imagine we've got lots of questions from folks about carbon markets and carbon contracts in particular. And so I've been working on educational information for landowners and ag producers who are looking at and kind of evaluating and negotiating carbon contracts. And so I guess my expertise would be related kind of to the different contractual terms, things for folks to look at, and some of the legal issues surrounding carbon contracts.
Awesome. Really interesting stuff. And some of those contracts, I'm sure, are pretty hard to break down. So a really great service for sure. So Lars, you are with EarthOptics. Tell me a little bit about what EarthOptics does.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having us. We're a technology startup, been around for a few years, and we specialize and focus on developing technology and using it to map soils. And so our whole goal is to make more detailed, more accurate maps of soil properties, one of which, and a very important one of which, is carbon. So we pride ourselves on being experts in how to map soil carbon and soil bulk density as accurately as possible at the lowest possible cost.
Mm-hmm. I know when we talked earlier, Lars, you kind of said, we're no longer just estimating the carbon capture. We're no longer just estimating carbon in soil. We can actually really quantify it. And I think you compared yourself to like being the accountant of the carbon markets. You're not a broker, you're the accountant.
Absolutely. We're not in the carbon marketplace business at all, but yeah, we like to consider ourselves the accounting firm. So if you want to know how much carbon is in the soil, we're the ones to call.
Perfect. Great comparison there. And Ben, tell me about what you guys are doing at Granular and Corteva.
Yeah, so our job is really just to provide farmers with market access, simplicity, and support, because we really see carbon as just a layer on their business and really just a part of good agronomy. So our job, if Lars is the accountant, we're kind of the paper pushers. So our job is to help tip the scale on practice adoption, bring in a new revenue stream, but try to just make it as darn simple as possible for the farmer outside, and then provide the level of rigor through our data and connecting to our partners like Indigo Ag or folks like Lars. Who do that measurement, reporting, and verification. Again, our job is to simplify the heck out of it for that farmer and then just tie it into really running a better business through some of the other things that Corteva does.
Awesome. Yeah, simplifying things is always great whenever you want large scale adoption, like I know is really being demanded now of farmers and industry. So, all right, so we're talking about carbon markets and we're not talking about this randomly. This is something that is really becoming a topic of conversation for our industry. Agriculture and really just the world at large is really looking at carbon capture and carbon markets. So I'd like each of you to talk to me about why carbon capture, why carbon markets is so important for sustainability and for, the future of farming as we know it. And I'll actually start back with you, Ben.
Yeah, I think, Ron, I think there's a lot of different reasons for it. And I think it's really the combination of, kind of the sustainability initiatives that you see kind of both a push and a pull from with farmers and downstream customers. And then I think just the economics. And so for us, really, I want to be able to support farmers in this regardless of their reasoning. But new revenue stream usually gets farmers' attention. Farmers are great stewards of their land, and so folks that want to think about yield resilience in the future and how this helps their land and their operation for generations to come, that's really important. And it all comes down for us of just how do we connect kind of the outside of agriculture demand, the need to work against climate change, with the realities on the farm.
Mm-hmm. Now, Lars, you guys are a startup and you're really looking into, soil mapping at large, but this carbon piece of it is really important to you guys. So why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason, because one of our whole goals is to make more detailed, more accurate soil property maps more cost effectively. But that's incredibly valuable from a carbon marketplace standpoint. The current value of a carbon credit is, soil carbon credit, somewhere between $20 to $40, mostly dependent on how well verified it is. And a typical row crop acre in the United States might achieve about a ton or so, maybe 2 tons tops of additional new net carbon due to practice change and other effects on an annual basis. And so if the cost of making measurements of those carbon increases aren't much lower than the price of the credit itself, it's really not a feasible economic system. So we're critically focused on how can we make an accurate enough measurement so everyone can trust that the carbon credits are valid and there actually is more carbon in the soil than there was before the credit was issued. How can we do so at sufficiently low cost that the whole system is viable? And that's really one of our big focuses.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that leads well in, Tiffany, you're working every day with farmers, or, not every day, but very frequently with farmers to talk about these carbon markets and things like that. And so I'm curious from your perspective, that farmer brain, why is this such an important part of the picture for farmers right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I'll sort of second what Ben said. I mean, I think that farmers are always looking, right, for additional revenue opportunities and what can we do on the farm to sort of diversify our operations. And right now, I think carbon is a potential option for folks. And they're just interested to see if that's something that they can make work, right, on their farm or their ranch with the practices that they have or are willing to do. So I think the revenue stream is one. I think another thing, right, I mean, a lot of times farmers may have already undertaken some of these practices from a conservation perspective. And I think that they're interested to see, is there potential benefits to us for having undertaken some of these practices? I think just seeing what's out there, what's available to folks is why there's such an interest in it now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to ask you another question, Tiffany, about farmers specifically. When we talk about getting into any new market, whether farmers wanting to try GMO soybeans, for example, there's always these barriers to entry. There's things that make it difficult. There's things that discourage them from the get-go. And so in your conversations with these farmers, what are those key barriers to entry that farmers need to overcome, and maybe that some industry partners can help them either understand or have resources to overcome?
Sure. I mean, I think from the legal perspective, at least, I've got kind of 4 things I can tell you, I think that are causing some concern or some, farmers being slow to enter into the market. I think one of those is just uncertainty, right? It's something new. We're not exactly sure how this works. The contracts are different, right? They're speaking a different language. They have terms that we're not familiar with. We're not used to how this is measured. So I think that there's just an uncertainty level there that people are a little bit hesitant to jump in and sign up. I think another thing that there's a lot of questions about what's coming next. And this is one of those timing things where you never know until hindsight's 2020, right? Should you have jumped in earlier or would you be better off waiting? And so, I think one example of that is there are these private industry contracts available now, but with the new farm bill coming, will we see program opportunities there? And if we sign up early for a contract, is that going to prohibit us from a program that might be better for us later? So I think that there's just some kind of, what's coming? Is it time to jump in now or not as well? Another thing that I think affects a lot of farmers is this concept of additionality, right? And the question there is, what if I've already adopted some of these practices, right? What if I already am a no-till farmer? Or what if I'm already using regenerative grazing in my livestock operation? Some of the contracts won't allow you to sign up for already, practices you've already adopted. And so for some people, I think that there's sort of some, is this even an opportunity for me, given that I was an early adopter of these practices? Now, there are some contracts that are at least allowing kind of a look back period. And I think that that's something we may see in the industry, is some way to sort of include folks who've already adopted these practices. And then the last thing I would say, I think we're going to talk more about this in a few minutes, but is I think that there are always privacy concerns, right? When we're dealing with contracting with different groups, when we're talking about people coming on our land, people having access to our data. So I think privacy concerns are kind of always an issue for farm and ranch operators.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, I saw you nodding your head like the entire time she was talking. Is there anything you would want to add to that?
I mean, those 4 buckets have a lot in them. So happy to dive in, but I think Tiffany just hit the nail on the head with all 4 of those.
Perfect. Well, that's always great to hear. So Lars, when we talk about carbon markets and carbon values in soil, you mentioned earlier that moving beyond just simple estimates to a more exact amount in soil to where we can really prove that what we're doing is valuable is really critical. So talk to me about how, what you guys are doing with this soil mapping and things like that is different than maybe the estimation strategies used before, and why this is important to the future of actually making a difference in carbon sequestration and actually making carbon markets sustainable.
Yeah, so I can first talk about what we do that's different, and then talk about why we think it's it's beneficial and actually solving some of those problems that Ashley pointed out. So first off, so measuring soil carbon is actually a pretty difficult challenge. Just to put some numbers behind it, an acre foot of soil weighs about 2,000 tons. For most typical Midwestern soils, you're looking at somewhere between 1% and 4% carbon content out of that 2,000 tons. So you're trying to measure something that's maybe going. So if it's at 1%, that means you have 20 tons out of 2,000 sitting there, and you're trying to measure that going from 20 to 21 tons over 1 year. So it's a tiny little change mixing with a really big chunk of soil. And so in order to measure that, actually make those estimates accurate enough, it's not good enough just to take soil samples. So what we do is we take soil samples just like everybody else does. But in addition to that, we have a suite of sensors that we drive over the entire field with. And we combine those two data sets together using machine learning. And that's what allows us to get a very accurate picture of every square inch of the field. Soil is so incredibly variable. I know everyone that works with it understands that firsthand. But I kind of liken it to, if you wanted to make an estimate of what colors are the American flag, but nobody told you weren't allowed to look at it, you just had to go sample it, you'd be hard pressed. You'd have to take a heck of a lot of samples to really understand how much red, how much white, and how much blue there was. And so really what our sensors allow us to do is, even though they don't directly detect carbon, what they do is they paint a very good black and white picture of that American flag as an analogy. So we have got a black and white picture of the American flag, and that allows us to figure out where to go sample. And when we do sample, what proportion of the field is represented by the sample that we just collected. So that's kind of an analogy for how the whole system works. And we think getting that accuracy level up, and that of course allows us to drive down costs, so we can make a much better assessment using fewer samples. And we think that really helps provide a potential solution to some of those challenges that Ashley mentioned, in terms of it allows us to move increasingly from payment for practice to payment for outcome, right? And that solves some of the additionality problems, and we can just start paying people for how much carbon they have in their soil, and how much they've already, including what they've already put there, and any new carbon that they add to the situation. I think there'll be new programs that come online where growers are considered to be stewards of the land and the carbon that they're helping stewards of the goals to get carbon out of the atmosphere and then keep it in the dirt for, let's pick a period of 100 years. And so the idea is all right, we'll just start paying people to hold that carbon there for 100 years. For people who've already adopted great practice changes and already have results, we can say, congratulations, you're already 17 years into your 100-year period. We're going to pay you for that. And we're going to keep on paying you for it for how long you keep it there and each new ton of carbon that you manage to get added in there. And that's all enabled by accurate and affordable quantification systems.
Mm-hmm. I actually just got a question from a farmer friend of mine that I'm going to volley out to see who wants to address this one. And he said, as I look at some of the carbon offers on the market right now, he's just a normal sized farmer in the Midwest, that 2,000 to 3,000 acre guy. And when he sees profitability right now, it's in the 20 to 40,000 acre farmers. And so that's a pretty big concern, because not every farmer has 20 to 40,000 acres. So what's it going to take to make carbon marketing attractive to the average farmer, or to even smaller farmers, because every farm has an influence? So what's it going to take for average people to be interested in this?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of programs, including ours, don't have an acreage minimum, but we do pay on those outcomes, as Lars was mentioning. And so really what it comes down to is, if you have fewer acres, we need to sequester more carbon. And so that'll just tie into, are the practices that sequester the most carbon, are they the right agronomically for your operation? And if so, there's definitely a viable path for an average producer, like you're saying, or even smaller producers to have that opportunity. But I guess I always just kind of shy away from the one size fits all. I don't want to just create something that works for everyone, because again, like these carbon markets today, they're often not paying enough for the full practice. And so we're kind of tipping the scale on the ROI of the given practices, which means that we really need to be focused on the agronomy and the ROI first, and then carbon markets just kind of help to kind of put the frosting on top, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ben, I'll follow up with another question for you. So, Corteva and Granular, have entered this carbon market, and you just mentioned that your guys' focus first is talking practices and making that agronomic return on investment first, and then transferring that into how do we kind of tack something else on top of that. So maybe talk to me about how you are connecting farmers and what this looks like with them. How are you converting from, okay, we're going to start trying strip tillage, we're going to start trying cover crops, to, well, let's talk about the carbon you sequestered and let's pay you for it.
Yeah, so me and my team, the joke before about us being the paper pushers, I mean, that's real. So we're lucky enough being part of Corteva. We have a Pioneer channel, we have our valued retail and independent consultant partners, and really, farmers and their advisors need to be thinking about the agronomy of these practices first. So when by the time the conversation gets to us and our team, hopefully the agronomy is already there, but we're going to double check and make sure, hey, are you really doing this practice because of the overall ROI, or are you doing it because of a carbon program, and just level set those expectations? So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is then just how we've constructed our offer, and it's really around a lot of the things that Tiffany was mentioning before. And so we really want farmers to farm for agronomy, not just for carbon. And then we take the risk on the back end to make sure that those outcomes are real and the buyers are getting what they paid for. And so that means that we have flexibility built in our contract. So one, we pay on outcomes, so that you're able to pick the right practice for the right acre. You're not going to just be bound to doing one practice. Two is we have an annual opt-out. So we have to re-earn that business, or if things change, like Tiffany mentioned, you're able to get out of the contract. Three, we have support. So we have a human in the loop, as well as software that you use for agronomy, not just for carbon, because we think that if you're going to spend the time to get all the data that's needed, as well as great technologies like Lars is talking about, you should be able to use that for better product placement, overall ROI analysis, yield analysis, all of those things that come back to good agronomy. I know I'm a broken record there, but it's really, really important to us. And then the last thing is just, how else can we just align those incentives so that a farmer can have trust, and, they don't have to spend all their time in a carbon program. And for us, that means sharing in the upside. So we're super clear in our contract, 75% of the value today and in the future goes to the farmer. We have a minimum base payment. They get paid on those outcomes. So that way, if a farmer does need to bring in a tillage implement because, they got in the field a little bit too early, where I'm from, I know that never happens. And there's never ruts, in the turn rows. They can go bring an implement there if that's the right answer. They're not going to get paid for carbon on that piece if there wasn't real carbon sequestered. But there's a reason farmers do what they do generally, and we want to just trust farmers to manage their operation the best way, and focus on that overall ROI.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Very interesting stuff. So we had a question come in from our audience, and I think that all three of you will be able to answer this, but probably in different ways. So Alex Martin Hahn just asked, we've looked at what the growers are asking in terms of carbon and carbon credits, but what about seed companies, and why should seed companies keep an eye on the carbon market? So I know for sure, Lars and Ben, you guys are gonna have lots of thoughts on this. And Tiffany, I'm gonna twist this question for you a little bit. And that is, what are farmers asking of seed companies? So I'll start with you, Lars. Why should seed companies be keeping an eye on the carbon market, and what do they need to know about carbon sequestration?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I know we're on Seed Speak, so it makes tons of sense. I think we're at it's a really exciting time, and we're at very early days. But as the value of carbon starts to grow, not just from carbon credits, but as we start entering the world of food product labeling, much like non-GMO, with carbon values and things like that, that just increases the revenue available for soil carbon from food. As that continues to grow, I think people will start looking at all aspects, including seed, because now we're not farming just for food, we're farming for food and carbon. And so the ROI calculations start becoming different when that's the case. And of course, like I said, we're very early days in that, but I don't think we're too far off from a future where people start making seed selection, not just for overall profitability, and that profitability will include carbon profitability. So there's all sorts of new type, I think, of hybrid opportunities and options that will be coming down the pike for seed companies to participate and lead to assist growers with maximizing profitability in this new carbon and food world.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ben, obviously, Granular and Corteva, there's a pretty big seed arm of that business too. So what's the conversations internally? I mean, what you can tell us about, how you're talking carbon and how that relates to breeding or whatever the seed conversation is.
Yeah, I mean, it spans from R&D all the way to our sales folks, and so I'm just a really lazy salesperson. I like to sell farmers checks, not ask them for money, and so you can imagine that helps in your customer engagement when you're providing that extra value. And obviously, a lot of the seed folks who are listening to this are doing that across the whole gamut of services they offer. I think Lars is spot on in terms of some of the potential for genetics and different traits to play in. And even if you think about just, the interplay between seed and crop protection, these are whole system changes often, and optimizing that system requires really understanding product placement, really requires understanding, what is the best seed for the right acre and the right practice. And then, I think lastly is just maybe to just double tap what Lars was saying is just, there will be more and more potential for, carbon to be rewarded. And we haven't really bred or really optimized for carbon or better nitrogen uptake. And if you look at the progress of science that seed companies have brought in the last 20, 30, 50, 100 years, I don't know, it gets me excited about just agriculture continuing to be a bigger lever in the fight against climate change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, Tiffany, from the farmer perspective, and some of this might be speculation, but you talk to farmers a lot, so I trust it. What do you think they're going to start asking from seed companies as it relates to this carbon capture?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. And I think that one thing you don't want to overlook, right? I think farmers trust their seed companies, right? And so when you're looking at an industry like we've talked about that's new, where there's a lot of uncertainty, we're unclear on how some of this is going to work or who we should trust, I think seed companies are in a really unique position because they already do have those relationships with farmers. And so I think that there's some real potential there to help provide education, to help sort of analyze some of these opportunities, and to help show, what options there might be. So I think that seed companies are in a really good place there. The other thing I would say, I would sort of echo what Ben's been saying here, but I think that the idea of let's really try and push this from an agronomic perspective, and then, the carbon element can sort of be like icing on top of the cake. I think that's really smart, right? And so certainly that's where seed companies come in, and we look and see what we can do to help folks agronomically, and then we'll see, what benefits there might be to carbon as well. So I think that there's a lot of potential there for seed company, not only, in the, like biological and new traits and genetics and those sorts of things, but like I say, also just from the educational and providing information and resources to folks as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tiffany, I think you brought up a really good point there. And there's this idea of trust. So carbon markets and carbon capture, all of this, it's not necessarily new, but it is new to farmers. It is new to the industry. It is something that's different, and it's something that could be a perceived risk. And so I'm curious, I'll start with Lars and Ben here. What do you guys think it's going to take to gain farmer and consumer trust when it comes to carbon capture? Farmer trust to try the practice, to try marketing this, and consumer trust to actually trust the values we are attributing to, okay, we've sequestered this much carbon and things like that. Lars, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the risk of talking my own book, I think two things are going to be super important. Accuracy and trust and quantification on both sides, right? Farmers are getting paid for carbon. They want to make sure they want to know whether they're getting paid the right amount, right? And similarly, buyers of carbon, whether it's the end consumer with product labeling or whether it's ExxonMobil, they want trust that the billions of dollars they're spending on carbon offsets are actually resulting in carbon out of the atmosphere. But then I think the second one is ease, right? From a grower standpoint, this has got to require as little work from them as possible, especially until those dollars get a lot higher than they are today. So I think the reducing commitment levels and pay for outcomes as opposed to pay for practice really enables that. But yeah, if this can be almost transparent and visible, and I know that's what Corteva and Ben are really good at doing too, that's going to just increase uptake. If it's a lot of work and a lot of administrative, they don't have time for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think, Ben? What's it going to take to get that trust from farmers and consumers?
Yeah, I think Lars hit the nail on the head with consumers. So just we have to make sure that the outcomes are real and it's good science. And we're lucky to have great extension scientists, great research scientists, and private companies doing that. I think on the farmer side, we just need to deliver. Things are going to change. There is uncertainty out there, and I think really it comes down to do we actually put our money where our mouths are at in terms of putting the farmer's interest first. And I think one of the approaches we've taken is just try to be brutally honest and transparent. And so I really appreciate people like Tiffany and and A&M who spend a lot of time with farmers on this. Like, it comes down to the contract, and so it's kind of that trust but verify kind of element that's important there. And so I always, talking to farmers or talking to friends back home, I always say, hey, look at all the contracts, look at all the offers. Even if we've got a good personal relationship, or you work with one of our retailers or Pioneer reps, like, you need to look at those options. And I think that level of transparency and just kind of clarity in the contracts can go a long way as we're again proving it, because farmers are smart enough to know that words only go so far. You need actions as well.
Now, Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, I would second what both Lars and Ben said. I think that one key really is this accuracy and measurement and verification. And I'll tell you right now, I think for a lot of farmers we talk to at this point, they're almost preferring the practice adoption payments versus the outcome adoption payments, because they feel like there's so much uncertainty in how that measurement's going to go. So I think that's a huge issue as far as trust goes. I can't agree more. You've got to read those contracts, understand those contracts. What's going to happen? People are going to find out the sneaky, tricky things that are in those contracts, and those companies won't be around anymore. And so I think we'll see more trust with that as we see more people in, doing these contracts, how things go. Look, agriculture is a small community. The bad apples will get found out.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tiffany, I'm curious, I've been reporting for a number of years now on things for farmers in this industry. Data privacy has always been part of the conversation, and it was a much, much bigger concern once, data was getting gathered in the quantities it was, years ago, but it's still part of the conversation today. Have you heard any concerns from farmers about how are we going to protect the data coming off of my farm about carbon or about whatever?
Absolutely. I mean, I think data privacy is just always going to be a huge issue for farmers and rural landowners, right? And I think there's concerns about who's going to have access to that data, how's it going to be used, right? How's it going to be stored? And then I think the other thing from a privacy perspective is just we're going to open our land up and let these people come on it, right? The buyer, the tester, the verifier. I just think that privacy concerns, they sure exist. And I think that that's where that trust with the company you're getting into the contract with will be so important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Lars, Ben, would either of you want to add anything about data privacy, since I know you guys are dealing with data?
Yeah, Ben, a lot more than I do, but we follow the tried and true practice of our customers own the data. The grower owns the data that we collect on their fields. We have to use it to make our products better, but they always own the data.
Yeah, I think same boat, and what both Lars and Tiffany said. I think this isn't a new problem, to your point earlier, Sonia, and I think just it's still hitting that standard of trust and action behind it. And for us, I think the biggest risk is what happens. We're sharing our data a little bit more downstream now. It's not just with the company, right? And so for us, it can only be used for what's for the actual credit generation purposes. So that way, you're not going to have folks who are 2-3 steps removed looking over a farmer's shoulder, which is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, we've got just a little bit of time left, but I'm always curious about this. What is the biggest misconception or point of confusion you guys have heard so far about carbon sequestration or carbon markets, from farmers, from industry, from whoever? What's kind of the biggest, like, oh, that's not right, guys. Let me help you out here. And I'll start with Tiffany.
Sure. And this may be a regional thing for Texas, but I'll tell you one thing that we have a lot of people that sort of seem shocked about is the potential carbon sequestration in the soil here. And so when we talk about, we're looking at payments of $20 to $40, per ton of carbon, that's fine if you're in an area where you have the potential to store a ton of carbon a year, right? You can look at that as a yearly payment. Here in the Panhandle, our folks are telling us that our storage potential may look more like 0.1 tons of carbon. And all of a sudden that $20 goes to $2, and that's kind of shocking for people. So that's one thing I think that folks need to keep their eye on and visit with their extension folks or someone about. What is the potential to store carbon here, and how much is that going to affect our potential payments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good point. What about you, Lars? What are you hearing?
Misconception-wise, actually, probably some of the biggest ones are that $2 figure that Tiffany just said. Hearing that from folks in the Midwest, so I think people get numbers thrown around, and and so folks in the Midwest might hear that they're only going to get paid $2, and that's definitely not worth it to them. Where in reality, it's probably a lot higher than that. So I think there's so many numbers flying around. That's just one of the many factors keeping people on the sidelines.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Ben?
I think we've talked about a lot of the uncertainties, so maybe I might go the opposite end. I think, if you're a farmer that is eligible, so you're in that adoption cycle, either that look back, like Tiffany mentioned, or you're adopting one of these practices, I would say in many cases it is simpler than we all make it out to be. If you're doing it for the right agronomic reasons and you have the data that's required for these programs, you're talking about the cost of this program being your time to enter that data and then your opportunity cost of another program. So if there is an opt-out, if you have that flexibility, and several programs do, not just ours, it is just a new revenue stream for really that de-risks and accelerates the change that you're driving as a farmer. Now, again, that doesn't apply to everyone, but for the folks that do, I think it is a heck of a lot simpler than we all make it out to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's definitely good to hear, because this is not a conversation that's going away anytime soon, for sure. So thank you, each of you, for bringing your expertise. I think I learned a lot, and I really appreciate hearing from each of you and hearing your different perspectives. So thank you all. And everyone else, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this week's session. If you have any follow-up questions, be sure to email me or message Seed World on Facebook. We're happy to address those questions. In the meantime, be sure to tune in next week at 12 o'clock Central, where we'll have another episode of Seed Speaks, because we're taking a deep dive into innovations that move the needle in agriculture. Thanks so much, and we'll see you then.